Good afternoon, gorgeous souls. So I have something that is for the Great Reset, which is this huge precipice that we're on, which is now going to be this huge invitation for us to actually heal and evolve past all the suffering, the pain that humanity collectively has been experiencing. And what that means is that we need to start actually unveiling some of the stuff that might seem mysterious because it's unseen, unknown, and no one talks about it. And when things remain in the shadow, they have power over us. And often just that is enough for us to polarize, to separate, and to avoid. But every trigger we have, everything that stirs, means that we have some level of resonance with it. It's got a gift of showing us something about ourselves. And really, when we begin to understand that that is the interface of us in relation to everything around us, we begin to then step into this role of understanding. The clues are always there. The red flags are always there. The people that come in are showing us so much about ourselves. And as we are getting more light onto this planet, there are literally veils of illusion being lifted daily, and it's intense. And there is so much collectively in the fields that are, you know, in our pantomime stage, there's so much of the shadow that's coming up. But what we have to understand is that is a outer reflection of what has been happening for eons to us individually, and we just haven't actually alchemized it yet. Now, when I use words like alchemy, again, people can go, okay, I separate that. That means something different to me, or that's woo-woo. But we need to start understanding that this awakening is about us merging this kind of construct of reality and into the unseen. We're merging physical and energetic and demystifying and beginning to understand that we're connected to it all at all times, and it's influencing us whether we believe in it or not. So one of the things that obviously is endemic, and it comes up time and time again, and this is about sexual trauma. And if we can consider, I don't know the exact stats, but I'm pretty sure it's like 1 in 4 girls has experienced some form of sexual abuse. It's prevalent for women. And obviously these are statistics based on people that have actually reported stuff. Now, from over a decade of working with women and my own personal journey of alchemy, this is something that touches all of our lives. It touches us on some level of our consciousness. And when we begin to go on this alchemy journey, whether we're also in the clinical field, a psychotherapist, a coach, and perhaps there are things that are happening for our clients that the old tools aren't working, we're not getting to the root of things. We might think that it's down to their mindset. We might think that they are not wanting to be visible or wanting to put themselves out there because there is some kind of nervous system reset that's needed. But the invitation is that we have to understand this consciousness evolution is expanding us to take us into the roots of things. And that means that we have to look at what is unconscious. And there's protocols and processes for this that make it simple and easy without it being, you know, this massive, almost separate construct. And this is what I want to demystify. So if you're on the pathway and you say, look, I'm working with all these goddesses and I'm doing divine feminine work, or I'm exploring inner child work or mother wound, it's to know that actually if we strip it all back, what you're looking for is unification. You're looking to connect in with something that holds a resonance to whether it's you at a higher level, your angelic self, more of a divine feminine frequency of self before wounding, or it's actually the fragmented parts of ourselves in childhood that we are reintegrating. This is what it's all about. And if we can understand that unity consciousness is about unification at different levels of our being through different timelines, and beginning to know that the unification is also through our energy bodies, our chakras, the architectural soul matrix, and the higher levels of ourselves, we are literally weaving in higher dimensional aspects of our soul. So when we start to get curious about past lives, or we start to get memories or flashbacks or curious moments that we get synchronistically driven to meet people and have conversations, it's because that aspect of your soul that had those experiences is desiring to reunify. And there's a process around that, because there's also fragmentation throughout every level of our being, throughout every layer of our consciousness, and every single soul on this planet has experienced fragmentation. So when we are working in a healing principle and we are not taking into account the soul or soul fragmentation, you are never going to root. You are never completing the lesson. You can't evolve your consciousness or your vibrational set point at a permanent level, because at root, it's about your soul consciousness reunifying in. And the shadow is the splitting of this consciousness. So I want to share, I think we learn more in stories. So to give you context here, I am coming from the lens of both clinical and more of the priestess guide, spiritual, energetic level as well, because they have to be merged, because we have both a human consciousness that needs to have an understanding of the unconscious material, and then that needs to be merged and integrated as well. So it's not about pushing away the 3D or rejecting all of that, but it is about understanding that these are layers of information and programming that actually are part of the unification process. And when we start to unify, we can actually create an energetic vessel that can hold more of our soul light. We can hold a higher vibration. We can hold more of our essence. And this is really what we're doing. And to also give context, many of the ancients that we are following, the only way that they could reach some level of enlightenment was to pretty much be completely detached from reality, not in any contact with anyone. So what that meant is the only way that they could clear their energy bodies, their mental and emotional energy bodies, so they could actually come into the heart, is literally by being so separate from everybody else and so disconnected from anything that could potentially influence their energy field. That was the only way they could do it then. That isn't realistic, and it's not really a pathway that any of us are being particularly called to embody now. Therefore, the tools do not actually apply for our modern day. And if we can consider that the Great Reset is going to be both within us and what we're seeing collectively, that means layer upon layer coming up. So if we know that there is a unification map, and that unification map is going to be around mother, father, our relationship to true mother, father, God, that reunification and the wounding of our connection in relation to those principles. And when we're looking at the mother wound, that's the access gateway point to the divine feminine, to integrating and healing from things that would have been persecution, or where there was also separation and splitting amongst women. The sisterhood wounds came in around Atlantis and ancient Egypt. So the witchcraft wounds that may well be affecting you ancestrally, they go deeper. So they affect your soul. So there'll be another layer. So this is why when we don't kind of know where it all fits in and why we're doing it, it can be a bit of like a kid in a candy shop. We can scroll and get 20 different loads of belief systems that are all telling us slightly different things, and you don't really know the lineage or where it's come from. But if you know that your core foundation is to reunify with yourself, to understand that through pain, shock, trauma, and suffering, just by being in this existence, there will have been splitting. Therefore, when you're called through a trigger to unearth what is underneath that, it's the invitation for you to reclaim and reunify. And there's a process around that. So rather than allowing the overwhelm or the constant triggers to then just have short-term fixes will only work on probably the emotional and the physical body, but they won't be working on the root. So if you never get to the root and you never integrate that part of soul back in, you will always come back to that wound down the line. There's no other way. And ultimately, those parts of you that have been fragmented off, they are not necessarily always in this reality. And I'm going to share a story, a client story, to give context. And really, those of you that are, healers, coaches, you're on your own path, and you know that you need to be able to take people deeper so that we can actually as a consciousness actually evolve past these woundings, because we have a deeper level of the multidimensional level of trauma and where and how we work with it in a really safe way, but also going to the depths. And that only comes with walking through initiation. That means the initiation is by you healing your own stuff. And when you have a process around that, you know that it gets easier each time, because essentially it's a similar route, shall we say, but you know what questions to ask and to whom when you're in different states and different places to essentially get those parts to come back in. So some teachings are kind of saying you almost like do a prayer and we're just calling parts back. I'm going to explain to you why that doesn't always work, and it certainly won't work for splitting, because essentially it's far deeper as a consciousness breakage, shall we say, and sexual trauma is one of the key things for splitting. Splitting creates a fracturing of the soul away from the soul stream. That means that that part of your consciousness is separate from you, but still, as anything across this universe and outside of this universe, is still in some level of energetic connection, meaning the suffering of that part, the disassociation of that part is still influencing you on some level. It just hasn't been integrated back in. And that's whether it's in this time stream, it's happened to you in this, childhood experience, or whether it's also happened in other timelines. And I'm going to share more about that in another live stream. So when we have sexual trauma, there is, in particular, if it happens in the very early stages of personality development, as in before about 7 or 8 years old, what's happening is that part is at an emotional development age of perhaps even a baby, a toddler. And if you can imagine where the emotional development age is, it means that when that split happens, they have a program that gets run, which is basically pain pleasure, meaning that they may well have been abused in a way that created a stimulation, and then they got punished, and then they got maybe soothed afterwards. So it creates these fracturing of our beliefs and programming around the world and ourselves. And that abandoned part had to split off, because essentially it would have gone unconscious, it would have detached. It was a way of the mind and the body protecting the individual whilst they were going through the experience. But that soul part actually is what ends up, can be in different realms, can be attached to the abusers. That's always the case. They become the programmers and the controllers. And there is usually a root split. And I'm going to share this because this is something that if you are just digging about in stuff and you don't know why you're still trying to heal the same things again and again, and you're not looking at things holistically, this is going to give you a really deep, in-depth understanding of it, but also we can demystify and know that there is a process to complete the 360 cycle, so that not only do you step into another level of your evolution where you actually step on the journey to retrieve those parts, but also that it doesn't need to be done in a way where you are re-experiencing it. Because part of the avoidance and the fear is about, I'm suddenly going to have to go through it again. There's a lot of frightening stuff around that. That is not the case. And I'm going to share with you essentially a client who I've worked with, and I will step you through the process, because this is essentially the process that is also within my reunification process. And this is a program that I have created, and it is something that is a template and a guide way for you to be able to do these different layers back into reunification. Whether you have kids, you're in a corporate environment, you're working with clients, you are in this reality. It doesn't matter whether you are healing trauma from this lifetime, because it will be the same if you are healing it in a past life and in anything else. The foundations are key. These foundations mean that you become the strong foundation for yourself. Because when we go through something like sexual trauma, we learn that we are not safe. We learn a split in our consciousness of dual beliefs. And part of our consciousness believes that another part of whoever did it is in control. And wherever there is sexual trauma and splitting, there is energetic interference. And yes, that means entities, demonics, spiritual bondage with ancestral spirits, all of this stuff. Why? Because sexual trauma creates and generates something called loosh. It's pain, it's fear, it's anxiety, it's desperation, it's hopelessness. It's really deep trauma, and it emits a frequency. And we know that. We know that when we've got something stuck in our body, there is an anxiety when a trigger happens. That energy gets fed on by beings that are not connected to divine source. And often they are in pain and suffering, and they are stuck somewhere and they can't move on. And sometimes it's other earthbound spirits who went through the same thing, and they're stuck in the same field of consciousness. And they are essentially all triggering each other and all feeding off each other. So it's a siphoning. So when we have these wounds, they're actually energy drains on our own life force. They're energy drains on both money, our creative sexual life force energy, our creativity, manifestation, magnetism, all of it. And they are impacting us through our different levels of our energy field, because essentially these are big pieces of our consciousness that need to come back in. So the more that we hold our energy, the more that we're anchored, the more magnetic we are, the less energetic interference we get. And when we don't have these wounds, we don't attract the hot, cold partners, the abusive dynamics, because the parts of us that are seeking to reunify are the parts of us that have most of those very hidden subconscious and unconscious belief systems that are looking for the programmer, the controller, the abuser, because that's the experience that they've had. And that animation of self, that soul fragment, is influencing you and your choices. Sometimes the inner voices can be part of these fragments. And that means that we are being, seeking essentially relationships and partners that often mimic these abusers. And because there is such an energetic charge when there is that level of trauma, and there's invasiveness, there's an entanglement with the root of who we are still connected to our abusers until we actually energetically divorce. So let's look at how I'm going to share with you in 2 hours. This is what I worked through with a client. And this is to demystify it. This is not her first time working with me. Therefore, there is already trust. She understands how we work. Her system understands working with me. Therefore, we could go quite deep quite quickly. However, you are your own safe space. So that means that takes us taking little steps to get more confident in our own abilities, in trusting ourselves again, because these wounds cause us to not trust ourselves. And depending on the level and the kind of context of it all, this is where we end up with almost our abusers' voices in our minds, and we end up not just with inner critics, but these are people's energy in our field. They should not be part of our soul stream. They are not part of the inner system that needs to be staying there. They are not part of the inner family that should be staying there. But when there is unhealed trauma and this entanglement, they have place in our field, in our consciousness. And the more we wake up, the more we hear it, the more we get influenced by it, the more it blocks us in certain levels, the more we have certain things like denial, avoidance, resistance that come up, procrastination. We can sometimes get very sleepy. There can be a disassociation that happens because these parts are influencing our day-to-day to protect us in some way. So my client came to me, and my client was working through particular trauma. This is working through mother wound and father wound. So we were going deep. This also was the triad. This related to the connection with source, God, meaning this level of trauma that she went through in succession from baby, about 6 months old, to probably about 15 or 16 years old, was continual. It was happening by both mother and father. And it was also happening by neighbors and other people that was in the church community. So basically, this had happened in the early stages of not even being at the level of being able to speak, early childhood, when all of her energy system and personality is being developed, where she is being exposed to one level of mother during the day, then a switch where there is another level of a parent acting another way. What that does is it creates this disorganization in self. On top of the fragmentation of the trauma that you go through to survive, there is also the fragmentation of it's the broken mirror of concept of self. Now, this is where we have all these defense mechanisms and ways of coping because we had to. So this obviously affects our energy field, because when we have that level of fragmentation, it creates splits between the emotional, mental, physical energy field. So there are gaps, there are leaks, not just in the chakras, not just holes, there are tears. It means that we cannot get unification of energy coming through us. That means even our own soul stream we can't get through us. So these wounds are the gatekeepers to us creating this true foundation of self. And when that happens, we're actually in a much better place to be in proximity, supporting others as well. It means we become not only the safe haven and house for ourselves, for our soul, but it means that when we're guiding our clients and taking these very deep, sacred journeys, we know very differently on a very intrinsic level the difference between our stuff and theirs, because we have done the inner work to unify. And as somebody that did clinical training, they didn't teach us this. So I know it's not there, because this stuff is deeper, it's at soul level. And this is why, as we're going through this huge reset, it's an old paradigm to new. There is a need for those in the clinical field to do this other layer so that they can serve better. There is a need for mothers to do this work before they have their children's or into the family system, because this is linked to ancestral stuff. This is essentially how our triggers, and we act out and we pass it on, because these are the unhealed parts that get triggered and play out. Unless we have not only conscious awareness, but we then choose not just to try and break the pattern through mental. This is soul and energetic. This is fully getting to the root and the understanding. And that's where you complete the whole cycle. But that is also where we step into this reunification process. That is what all of us are actually on. So in the beginning, first thing we're doing, the space is set up in a multidimensional way, meaning we are not just doing it any old place like now. That place is set up architecturally, energetically, with multidimensional teams that work in multidimensional ways. When there is trauma, there is always interference in the field, or there can be, and there is always, where those soul fragments are so traumatized, you will have darker energies that are attached. So we need to make sure that we know what we're playing with. So we always have the field set up in a certain way. There is an energetic divorce that we do first, because the mental and the emotional body is often polluted with lots of energy of other people. We've been scrolling all day, so we've got all that stuff in there. There's often a lot of unprocessed emotions, and the energy is very stuck. We do an energetic divorce first. We're starting with a clear, pristine, safe field before we do anything else. We're also working with all levels of consciousness of that individual in a holistic perspective. When you don't have all parts of self on board for doing root work, I'll share with you why it doesn't work. And this only comes through the initiations of really understanding yourself and going on these journeys with others to know this is how it kind of works. And also, it's about relationships. I have to be the safe space that can guide in multidimensional realms with many players in different playgrounds, with the ability to essentially alchemize, retrieve those parts back in. That will require sometimes negotiation. It certainly requires protocols, because there's a lot of healing that has to be done before they can even come back in. And it's unique in each time, but I'm going to give you this because it doesn't need to take a long time, but I'm mapping this out so that it is not you don't need to fear it. And I'm going to be sharing some stuff that is underworld and all sorts, because that is where these parts end up. So we had to go to root. So we went to the root time this splitting happened. It's about 6 months old. I had to then locate where that part was. And through my client, she was given D1, D2. I'm like, great, okay, that's the underworld. So that is to know that she received that information. I'm mapping the field. I know where it is. I can access there. Let's go. So as we go down there, that part is a gatekeeper. That part is in control of 36 other parts that are spread out through the underworld, the phantom matrix, the astral plane, and with the abusers. This part, if we hadn't got that part at 6 months old, A, we wouldn't be able to get the rest. B, there was a group who were actually in place to re-put all of the booby traps and everything in place to put it back in again. So if you ever feel like you're clearing and clearing and clearing, and you get a little bit and then it stops, then a little bit and it stops, it's because there are these kind of things going on. There are parts of your consciousness that have been programmed and through whatever contracts and things they're doing to essentially block the individual from having full liberation. On top of that, when we go through lots of trauma like this, we have spirit guides that essentially are working with all these aspects and helping you through this stuff. If we don't upgrade the guides, once we do this work, those guides will keep the doors shut because the contracts are still in place. So can you see how this is multi-layered? It's not just go in there and call some soul fragments back or do a bit of womb healing and talk to the womb. We're bringing all parts in. We need to have the womb involved and on board. We need to have the mind, body, soul, and emotions. And we're tracking it all in the field. We're gathering all the information before we're doing anything else, because we need to map out how the internal system and the energetic system and the soul system are interweaving and working into the physical. Because it's not just straightforward. So when we know the questions to ask and we know that where we're going and where everything feeds in energetically, we kind of have a map. So it means that's why she was so confident in going into this so deeply, is because we've kind of done this before. So by going into that part, I had to go into the underworld. And in the underworld, we could see this part was surrounded by other children, babies, animals, demons, earthbound spirits, weird little beings, and it didn't want to leave. It had made certain agreements essentially around never ever having a voice, always being silent, always being in service to the family member that had done the abuse, believed that their God was actually the three abusers, and that essentially it was in service to never ever tell, never ever allow that person to move past this. So it was literally had been programmed. And if you can imagine the consciousness of a 6-month-old, I'm working at its higher self, but I'm also working with, a baby that had lots of fear, anger, rage, and then was basically, you are silenced. You will never be heard. So that basically means on a very deep intrinsic level, that individual knew that whatever suffering it went through, no one would ever see or hear it. This is not a subconscious belief. This is such a core level, soul level and personality belief that this would have affected her in every area of her life. And it was hidden. So this part is in the underworld, and this part has demonics attached to it. This part that's its little family. It doesn't know any different. All the anger and the rage and the suppression, that's still there. And that's the part that is deeply hidden, that was not ever able even to see the light. And what I realized once we'd undone the contracts and then I mapped out, the phantom matrix is really connected in with anything to do with sexual abuse. It links in with stuff that happened in Atlantis and beyond. It means that when there is that level of soul kind of fracturing, parts get spread out, parts get in the phantom matrix, then you can't find them. When they're in the phantom matrix, it always links back into stuff like Babylon. So I knew this was linking into a past life that we'd worked on, and I knew it was linked into also some ancestral pieces in this wider piece of what was going on. So we had to get that piece out. They were all making different agreements. All of these parts had soul contracts with other beings around them that were holding it in place. So I knew that to pull this whole thing down, to get them all out, rehabilitate them, resuscitate some of them because they had no light, emotionally upgrade them before they can be integrated back in, I had to have a conversation. So I'm there having a conversation with all these beings in the underworld. And I put up this massive big like mirror screen. I'm like, I'm going to show you that you've all been lied to. I'm going to show you the truth. I'm going to show you the divine truth of why you're here, what happened, what has been lying to you. And then I'm going to show you the truth. And I'm going to show you that I want you to go in, and I'm speaking to like hundreds and hundreds of these beings. I said, I want you to tune in at this moment. What I speak to you, tune into how my heart feels, tune into how my client's heart feels, asking her aspect of self, feel into her heart. There's love there. There's light there. Feel that warmth. And I want you to take your consciousness back to the people that abused you, to the reason that you're in there, to the things that happened to you. Those other people, feel into their heart. What was there? There was no love. There was no soul. And suddenly the whole energy field shifted. And I said, look, you have a jailbreak opportunity. When you have conscious awareness of something and you are willing to understand something at a different level, whether you're in the underworld, in the darkness, in the shadow, nobody is stuck anywhere. And our role, this is a polarity integration that I'm doing here, and that required me to go into these different fields. This is root work. This is unification work. I was able to liberate hundreds and hundreds of beings that this soul aspect had made contracts with, breaking all the agreements, healing all the trauma. And there were demons and beings. None of them can move forwards. They're stuck down there. Now, I work in a unified field with many different levels of consciousness. They get the invitation. Can you be liberated, rehabilitated? Do you want to? Because I'm offering this and I'm going to be going. So the door shuts and that's it. And this part's going to come with us, and we get to liberate others if they can and will come. And those teams will take them to the appropriate astral plane and the rehabilitation. And we start to assist the wider. Because it's never straight. Those parts wouldn't have let go of each other. And they had agreements with each other not to leave each other. That was their little family. Dysfunctional, pain-based family in an underworld hell realm. D1, D2. So all of the interference that my client had over the years, demonics, fear-based stuff, it was coming through a part of her that was stuck, that she was deeply unknowing of. So when I could work with 36 parts of her and hundreds of these other beings in these different realms, I'm literally the whole lot's up at once. And I'm communicating with them all, and they can feel and see me, and they can feel the frequency and what's coming through me as I'm sharing. And I explained, they haven't had free will. I'm giving them an option. I'm explaining things. This isn't under duress. I'm not threatening them. I'm not forcing them. But I am highlighting to them there is a different way. And I'm highlighting the level of harm that was created upon them, the level of harm that they created towards others. And then I get to show them that there is another way. I get to show them an illuminated, healed, and the love they've never had. And when that happens, they feel it. They feel it in me. And of course, just as all of us have to take that step, will we say yes? For them, it's an initiation to leave a realm that they've been stuck in, to walk a new path, to reunify, to experience the physicality. Some of them have never seen light, never seen grass, never seen snow. They've been fractured so young, they've had none of those experiences. So when we worked in the whole thing, and unraveled it all, dismantled it all, disconnected all these other people. And literally it was like all these different layers, liberating more than we'd gone in for. So powerful, so healing to get to that root. Then the next piece of work. So my client knows the protocols. She knows there's this particular spiritual bath that I recommend with that kind of work. It's a lot of dark, stuck energy that's in the physical field and the energy field. So she's got a protocol around diet to support that for the next few days. She has a particular ritual to do in the bath that works with particular plants that are anciently known to work with clearing and this dark, dense energy. She is integrating the consciousness now. So what's it like the next day? She said it felt weird. It was like I was trying to learn to walk again. No one talks about this. When we get our soul consciousness back in, we are weaving parts of our consciousness back in. It can feel very noticeably different. We have to get used to movement, being in our bodies. She explained, I've got this feeling of anxiety coming up. I'm like, yes, because there's parts of some of the energy that needs to be moved through. If you can imagine a baby being, hurt, the only way it can move the energy out is crying, and then it was suppressed. So that cycle of the emotional charge being able to be released didn't happen. But now we have the soul back in and they're all working together. Now, with the movement protocols and practices that I give my clients, this is the next stage. She has a tool through voice, movement, dance to get it out, to move it, to work with it. With all parts of herself in coherence in that process. She is becoming the strong foundation for herself. Because we've worked at that level, it's not affecting her nervous system anymore. She's going through a process of neural repatterning. We have cleared those programs that were literally keeping her hostage, energetically, mentally. And this is now the process to understand, well, I can now suddenly feel energy coming through. It wasn't getting stuck in certain places. Her mind felt very busy, like there was lots of other kind of opinions. Like, okay, we need to unify that. It's like children all shouting at a parent at once. Okay, there's so many that have come back at once, which is amazing, but we need to get them unified because you can only hear it in one way. And we worked with that. So we get them to work in a certain way because we're working in the consciousness as a whole. And when that happens and we're coming into that unification, we're coming into coherence, and we know that it's always coming back into that centered pillar that we're building up, they settle down, they relax, they feel calm, they feel safe. They start to weave deeper in. And over the coming days, she's going to learn what it is like to be in her wholeness, how her perceptions will change, sensations change, connection to body changes, how her energy has already shifted. Old triggers are no longer triggering her anymore. The process now is about really, as her reparented individual, she is the adult self, it will be about leading from that. Self-care is a strong foundation. Mental, physical, emotional, spiritual wellness are the anchors for this work. She's working on clearing and keeping her channel of light open. She's listening and tuning in with her heart and her higher self. She's allowing herself to integrate. That is in a 2-day process. And when I say 2 days, 2 days in ceremony, 2 hours in ceremony with me, and then the next day is her integration. So if we can go from that level of core wound, because that is a true core wound with multiple layers, if we can go from that in 2 hours to then starting to reintegrate, and she's already got these amazing protocols. She's been doing her energy clearing that I give her. She's been shifting up her diet and her exercise already to help her, strong body, strong foundation, trusting herself. keeping her word to herself. The next layers, she already has a practice of forgiveness. Forgiveness is the thing that removes the quantum entanglement. It removes what are called karmic knots in the nadis, the system going up the back of the spine. She'll be working on deeper layers of forgiveness between herself for these other parts, because these other parts are the ones that have been kind of sabotaging her, but also she'll be working on the forgiveness with all of those involved. And they'll be integrating probably stories, memories, and things that come up, but understanding that they're coming up for witness. So that she is literally, this is a rebirth process. 36 aspects of herself have formed a false narrative and personality for her. Every relationship, an ex-husband, the levels of abuse and stuff that she knew about through different levels of her childhood and teenage times. This is a deep reconnection to her true relationship with God. When there is sexual trauma, some of the fields of consciousness pull you into false matrix, into fields where there is energy siphoning, draining, going into false gods and goddesses. And many people do rituals and still practice those rituals, and that's where that energy goes. Some of her energy was also in the false womb worlds, which is also endemic to the stuff in Atlantis and Egypt. So when we're pulling all this stuff back and getting them out of these other places, getting that consciousness back in, that's deep soul work. But that means that she is anchored. She has taken sovereignty over her life, over her energy field, and she is liberated. And whilst doing this, we were liberating her from carrying what was a repeated pattern that had been repeated by others in her lineage. That was the root of the karma that she was clearing on behalf of her ancestral line. So through that, we were able to collapse it all out for the ancestral line. That process of the work we're doing with all of these shadow parts is called polarity integration. The polarity integration is the reunification. And through doing that, all these other identities of self that have been operating have to be unified into this field, into the soul stream. You are getting your abused parts back, if we want to be really basic. This has to happen through the healing work to complete it. When we do that, all of these false belief programs, all the subconscious sabotage and the trigger, it goes, because you can wipe it all. But it has to come from a rehabilitation process with those parts. So if that's what can happen in 2 days for somebody going into wounds that are that deep, without re-traumatizing herself, actually understanding with such a large context of exactly what was happening for her and her soul, and being like, that's why I kept on getting these things in these dreams. That's why I kept on seeing myself in this place. Yes, because you were connecting in with those parts of yourself. You just didn't know. Imagine what you can do if you were to choose to proactively understand that the markers of the wounds that you have in this lifetime are the keys to your soul understanding and truth. These are gateways. These wounds, they connect in with priestess wounds. They connect in with many different things. And this is the gift. It allows you to know that when you've cleared this stuff in this lifetime, whatever another layer comes in will have threads into the same thing. So you just go back and do the same process. Look for where those parts are. You're doing this certain healing work. There is a need to understand the framework. Emotional development ages. Really important. Understanding the splitting of the soul influences the personality development. Understanding the entanglement that happens with our caregivers when there is this kind of dysfunction going on, not just from environmental, but it's at that programming that happens with the trauma, because that's where there is disassociation, and that's where those very hidden root programs come in. and we have to release the energy, the charge. And when we do that, all of these soul contracts to carry all this stuff, to be this one that is going to be the liberator, you get to complete it. You get to renegotiate the next expansiveness of self, because there's no point, there's no growth in repeating it. So when we start to negotiate with our Akashic record teams and higher self councils, and we start to unify, we start to work in coherence, meaning there's no point me repeating this, and I'm not prepared to go through the same things to help others in that way, because I want to grow and expand past it. I've done the same thing for lifetimes. So the reason I'm sharing this is our foundation. This is the strong foundations. So can you imagine being a therapist, a healer, a coach, somebody that leads others, who is actually able to, through their own understanding, inner standing, able to not only hold that space and lead people into that deeper levels of understanding of self, but that you could actually transform people's lives at this very core level, which is deeply needed for the evolution of our planet at this time, so that then they can actually start to move from reactivity, which is always a wound, impulsivity, which is always a wound, addictions, struggle, all of this stuff resides in these woundings, and they're not our true self. They drain our energy in many different ways. And when we understand that there is a thread of how this stuff all interweaves, and when we have that framework and we know the questions, and we begin to start to explore this in ourselves, and we become that safe space, we begin to start to become that detective, and we get more confident, and we know that if we have a strong, clear field, any guidance we get and any questions we ask, we're going to get a clearer information back in. And that's what we need. Each individual at this time is being asked to go on that individual journey of self, of individuation into unification. And that means when we start on that path, we then meet our true tribes. We meet the others that aren't all holding mother wounds. We can be in safe space with women, knowing that there's not all of this other stuff going on. We know that we can be very different mothers. We can hold things in different ways with different lenses, from different levels of depth and capacity and compassion, without entangling ourselves. We start to be a different version of self because we are not holding any of this. And we have compassion for others, and we can lead them quicker through their own journeys, because we've been willing to go further than the status quo of what we've been taught. And that does not need to be difficult. So I have compiled through my own initiations, because this took me from conception into understanding what goes in the womb, what happens in these different early emotional development ages, all of this stuff, interweaving, I've done it. This is part of my own path that I've then been sharing over the past decade with others. I've pulled all of this together into a program, and one time only, I'm going to be teaching it live. And my book, I have The Modern Day High Priestess, Initiations of Living Unapologetically. All my lessons, my information, which brings both clinical and things that you can reference, and all of these things to bring it to life for you, because we need context, a framework. It's all in the book. And all of the tools and the unfiltered teachings that can't be shared on here, and all of the things that lock it in and bring it to life. Knowing how everything is interrelated, knowing confidently how to communicate with different beings and different levels of consciousness, and how that interrelates to you. All of the stuff that we just don't really have in one place. And we're getting piecemeal bits all over the place, and we're learning in a 4-second reel. I mean, like, that's bonkers. That's going to keep us fragmented. When we take the path of unification, that's it. Once you're unified, you're not going to be split again. You don't need to go through the same lessons. Everything in your whole lens shifts. It's the ultimate maturation. And at that point, then you're evolving. You're beginning to then start to work through higher levels of self. So you can hold these higher blissful states, because you've not got all the trauma that's blocking, and the other programming that's blocking basically the physical body. It means that we can have very deep roots and high branches. But will you step through the initiation to walk that pathway, to heal yourself, to understand yourself, to reclaim yourself, to take the journey to reintegrate yourself? Because that's what this actually is. And we can work with all these different guides and teams and beings at the different levels. And that's how we've got soul contracts with them. We have karma with different beings as well. And you will have karma with different galactic timelines and beings. You've got it with those in other different realms. So again, your strong foundations gives you the strong foundations to do the next layers of work. This all relates to how you manifest, because your whole system is literally how the light sound comes through you, and everything is light and sound. Everything is first in energy before into matter. So strong foundations with your field lit up and working properly means that any intention and any action and any thought and any spoken word is going to literally bring deeper levels of alignment, deeper levels of flow, because it is coming through you. You become this divine conduit and vessel. So we can work with these different consciousness fields. We can work with, the different divine goddesses and do all of this stuff. But like ultimately the foundation is reunification of you. They are showing you that you have access to a 5D template of the angelic self. You can work and build that yourself. They are helping you entrain to higher frequencies. Our role is not just to stay interacting, it's to start re-architecting ourselves so we get to evolve, so we get to rise. They're there to show us the possibility of it whilst in physical form. And there are many on these spiritual, kind of communities that are very lost, very fragmented. It's much easier to be in a, fantasy land somewhere, taking your consciousness somewhere else, than it is because you haven't done the root work. And what I'm sharing with you is the root work does not need to be the thing to avoid and to fear. It's actually the making of you. It's your liberator. And everything shifts from that. So this is where we really step into our power, and I'm sharing the process. I'm sharing the depths, and you're going to get my energetic focus with you starting on Thursday. These wounds are deep. There are layers. And I can tell you, if you have a spiritual business, you're interacting with people and money, those core wounds are woven into all of it. So what comes up for us at different levels will play out in our businesses, because that's just how it is. We are on a growth mission. So when you work deeply in these things, they don't need to start playing out in your business, because you've already alchemized them. We have a choice. We wait till it blows up in our faces, or we start doing the deeper work, build strong foundations, and when thing comes up, we're like, oh, it's another layer. I know how to work with this. We know there's always going to be parts that hold conflicting dualistic beliefs. If we know how to get to the root, then it's much easier to do that than try and figure out why we're avoiding stuff or why certain things are happening. The answers are quite literally within us, but we just need to have the process and the toolkit and the guidance to figure out where the keys are. So if this resonates with you, this program is also, there's two things part of this. Integration, because we're doing shadow work, essentially. We're doing energetic work. There's lots of teaching, really powerful. This is your evolutionary work, your toolkit, your education of this. But it's also, we're learning to live with a higher frequency and consciousness. We're learning to integrate. We're learning to expand, find joyful stuff again. When we get those childhood parts back, you've got more energy and joy, playfulness. If your life is devoid of that now, it will feel quite stifling. So I've created the Temple of Evolution, which is for those that have been through the program, can then come into that community. That community has one area of experience, which is group Q&A, where you get the support integration. But the other containers are all stuff that we're doing to grow and evolve and co-create and be part of something new. We're not just focusing on the shadow. We've got to integrate shadow and light. We've got to bring this energy and do something with this extra shifts that we've been through. And you want to be around other people that have done the same thing, because one of the biggest things that's challenging on this journey is like, you're all getting different pieces of the puzzle, and you often don't have people around you that understand what you're going through or what you've been through. And if you're talking to somebody that's just in the mental body, all they're doing is consuming information, they think they know lots of stuff, but they're not doing the actual root work, it's very different frequency-wise. it doesn't have a resonance. You don't want it doesn't feel good. So this community is by design something that I've longed for a long time, is to be around others who are taking that radical self-responsibility for both their shadow and their light. We're here to live and thrive just as much as we are here to do the root cleanup. And it's about that coherence as well. So if that resonates for you, one of the things that I'm offering in this initial container is that we go for 6 weeks. There'll be a break over Christmas starting Thursday the 5th, and we are going to go through different layers, and I'm going to be taking you through the process. Outside of the ceremony, you're going to have integration, which will be movement. There might be things that's diet. There's things that are going to be helping you process what's gone on and start to have a high level of vision for the coming weeks, for where you want to be in 2025. I'm going to be showing you the thread of why these things are interrelated with different layers. And rather than you having to wait until the next thing comes up, we're going to demystify it. We're going to do ancestral healing. We're going to do forgiveness work that is actually going to quantumly disentangle you so that you can actually have the quantum leap or the new soul contracts. It's not the same as just kind of, oh yeah, I forgive. And we've got to work on, like, you know, the deeper you forgive, the deeper your connection to your light, the deeper you disentangle from all the stuff you don't want, the deeper you are connected to source light. We've all got wounds with God and source. Many, many people in the spiritual communities want to work with the goddess, but don't want to connect to source. That means you have lots of shadow. You have lots of stuff that's not integrated yet. You have lots of energy that's working in fallen fields, because that by design is what's been happening on this planet. They've wanted us to not be connected to source, to understand our own connection to source. This is what we work on. If you realize that literally it takes you over a very short period of time to go through all of this, have all the toolkit, the maintenance, you're not working through tons of triggers and nervous system resets because we've gone to the root of why it happened. That is empowerment. That liberates you from needing to have all of these multiple different rituals to try and just survive the day. And I know, because I lived that. I was in a corporate role whilst juggling all of this as well. So wherever you are, this is your strong foundations, and it's an invitation for you then also to be within the Temple of Evolution group for 3 months. So you're getting 3 months worth of access to me, essentially. What will happen after this program's taught live is that all of the live teachings and everything else, it's going to go into just an online program. Therefore, if you had the program, you would then get access to Temple of the Temple group, and then you can get some Q&A support, etc. But you just wouldn't get the access to me taking you through the journey with you. It won't be less impactful because it's all going to be set up energetically and on a quantum level, but it's just a question. What part of you is not ready to say yes to yourself now? Like, what is the cost of just not actually healing these things and continuing with the dissatisfaction? We end up feeling very stuck. And often we can be in apathy, depression, anxiety, because this is the stuff that's actually coming up. And in a soul awakening experience, there is often a period of darkness, of this dark night of the soul. This is the work that takes you out of dark night of the soul. Dark night of the soul activates all these parts of self that are in the dungeon, shall we say. It's about that journey into the light and then the polarity integration of it. This is what I'm taking you through. So if this resonates, I'm popping all the details below. You can reach out to me through my website. All the information is there. And I'm excited to be leading this first group. If, for example, you wanted to step in and it's in a week's time and you watch this, you can still join. As I mentioned, this is going to be an open thing. This is a really powerful process with support and integration that has been part of not only my own journey, but what I've been working with others with for 8 years and even longer than that when it was just the clinical stuff. So this stuff works, it's powerful, it's for now, it's multidimensional, it is deep roots to high branches. It gives you the empowerment, the toolkit. You become your healer because you choose to walk the path of initiation. So the invitation's there for you, sending you lots of love, and hope to see you there.